The next hour on Trial Story, 6-week-old Brooke Sousa dies. The prosecutor says the Sousas killed their own baby.
She was murdered.
That is not what happened.
The Sousas say their 2-year-old was responsible.
They're charged with a crime they didn't commit.
They did what was unthinkable.
From opening statements to the verdict. Next on Trial Story, parents on trial. Was it murder?
There's the kid helping her.
This was a happy time in the Sousa household. Brooke Sousa had just been born, and she had plenty of company. Her 2 sisters were ready to play with her. Julie Schatz and Jerry Sousa had met at work in 1988. They fell in love and began living together. Within 6 months, they moved here, just outside Seattle, Washington. It became crowded living. The couple, 2 children, and the newborn in a small apartment. But the Sousas say they were content. That is, until one night in May 1992, soon after the baby was born, when something went terribly wrong.
Mr. Sousa called 911 emergency, indicating that he needed emergency help because his newborn, the baby, the Brooke, the 6-week-old, had been burned by scalding water.
Local police and paramedics rushed to the scene. They were told the baby was no longer breathing. Brooke died as the result of being burned by scalding hot water.
He indicated in the 911 call that he didn't know how it had happened, that his wife had awakened him, and that he was told that the 2-year-old was responsible.
The Sousas said it was a horrible accident, that while they slept, 2.5-year-old Sierra tried to give the baby a bath in the bathroom sink where the Sousas' water runs very hot at 151 degrees.
Hi, it's Kathy Goder. Is Gina?
But senior prosecutor Kathryn Goder calls the story ludicrous. She's convinced that this is the ultimate case of child abuse. She and her co-prosecutor argue that Julie Sousa killed her own daughter.
We've charged the mother with murder in the 2nd degree for assaulting the child and the child dying from the assault, and the assault being holding the baby by the feet and dunking it into scalding water in and out very quickly.
Prosecutors also charged Jerry Sousa with 2nd-degree murder for allegedly trying to cover up the incident instead of promptly seeking medical help. Medical help prosecutors say that could have saved the child's life. The Sousas say these charges are preposterous.
As far as Julie and I are concerned, the only thing we did wrong was not wake up in time to save our child's life, and we'll regret that for the rest of our lives.
If the Sousas are telling the truth, then they are the victims of a system that some people say goes too far in trying to prosecute child abusers. If they are lying, then they are guilty of a most heinous crime, killing their own baby. In the next hour, you'll find out what the jury decides, and that decision will ultimately depend on the evidence. Evidence that the defense says is too weak to prove guilt. The state's investigation turned up no smoking gun. There's no conclusive physical evidence pointing to the Sousas' guilt. The couple has no history of child abuse, and there are no eyewitnesses. Nonetheless, prosecutors claim that they'll prove their case based upon circumstantial evidence and medical testimony.
There are overwhelming facts that tell you that the 2-year-old didn't do it and that an adult had to be responsible for doing this to Brooke.
But the Sousas' attorney, David Allen, says the Sousas are victims, not criminals.
There are 2 people who were caught up in a terrible tragedy, actually a triple tragedy here. They lost their baby, their 2.5-year-old killed the baby, and now they're charged with a crime they didn't commit.
The Sousas, Jerry, a 43-year-old vice president of a printing company, and Julie, a 28-year-old housewife, who were married just 3 weeks after the death of Brooke, must now defend themselves in a court of law. If convicted of murder, they could face up to life in prison. Deputy Prosecutor Patricia Eakes begins the case for the state.
Brooke Sousa only spent 6 weeks on this earth. When she was 6 weeks old, her life was ended. She died a horrible and painful death. Brooke Sousa did not die of natural causes. but she was murdered. For some reason, Mrs. Sousa became so frustrated with Brooke that she shoved her into a pool or sink full of scalding hot water. And she burned Brooke. And after Brooke was burned, and as she suffered the excruciating pain that she would have had as a result of those burns, her parents tried desperately to come up with some story to cover up what they had done. And in their desperation to conceal their own crime, they did what was unthinkable. They blamed their crime on their other daughter, on 2-year-old Sierra Sousa. After you've heard all of the evidence in the case, and you'll see exhibits and pictures and hear testimony and watch a videotape or two, after you've heard all of that evidence, you will be convinced, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendants murdered Brooke Sousa.
Attorney Todd Maybrown gives the opening statement for the defense.
It was a very powerful story that you heard from the state, but please remember, and we submit to you, that many of the things that you heard the state discuss will not be proven, will not be shown here in court. And then we know that Sierra got out of the bed, undressed her sister, picked her up, carried her over into the bathroom, climbed up onto the toilet, and placed her into the sink, and turned on the hot water. Now, the state has attempted to prove two things: that Julie Sousa thrust her baby headfirst into a pool of water, and that Julie and Jerry created a conspiracy of silence and didn't call 911 quickly. The evidence isn't going to prove that. Both are untrue. This was a horrible tragedy, and we'll prove to you that Julie and Jerry are innocent of both of these charges. Thank you very much.
Please raise your right hand.
Like a puzzle, the various pieces of the state's case must come together in order to convince the jury of the Sousa's guilt. The prosecution's first witness is Dr. Donald Reay, chief medical examiner for the Seattle area.
Did you have occasion to perform an autopsy on the body of an infant by the name of Brooke Sousa?
Yes, I did.
Right. When was it that you performed that autopsy, doctor?
That was performed on 12 May of the past year, 92.
And what did you determine the cause of death for Brooke?
Well, I determined her death to have been the result of body surface burns. These burns were the result of scalding.
And how did you classify this death?
I classified this death as a homicide.
The next day, defense attorney David Allen cross-examined Dr. Reay.
And there are syndromes that I'm sure you're familiar with, one called the battered child syndrome.
Yes, sir, correct. Right.
That's a child who suffered prior injury that seems to be non-accidental injury.
That's correct.
And this child wasn't a battered child as far as you can tell.
No.
Object.
So other than the obvious terrible insult of the burn, the child was otherwise perfect.
Oh, it was normally developed, healthy-appearing child.
The defense's point: there is no physical evidence that the Sousas had abused their baby Brooke. But the defense does not need to prove anything. It's up to the state to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the Sousas murdered their baby.
Stay tuned for the verdict later in this hour. We now return to this episode of Trial Story.
Prosecutor Kathryn Goder has tried nearly 30 homicide cases in her 13-year career as a prosecutor, but this case, Washington versus Sousa, may prove to be one of her toughest. With no eyewitnesses, she must rely on a patchwork of investigators, medical personnel, and circumstantial evidence to convince the jury that Julie and Jerry Sousa are guilty of murder. Prosecutors introduce a key piece of evidence, the tape of the 911 phone call Jerry Sousa made that night.
I need an ambulance sent to Misty Cove Condominium. What's the problem? I don't know. I've got a daughter that's a newborn, and my younger daughter, 2-year-old, somehow has burned her really bad with hot water. and she's unconscious. I don't know what to do. Okay, is your daughter breathing normally, sir? No, she's not. She's hardly breathing. Her skin is parched. It's actually come off in places. I don't know what to do. I put her under cold water just to try and cool her down. Okay, can you check and see if the baby's breathing for me, sir? Second. Julie, I got to tell you. No, she's not breathing. Okay, and how did you CPR, sir? No, what do I need to do? Okay, you willing to do that with me? Go ahead. Okay. Listen carefully. Bring the baby over to the phone. Okay, this is okay? All right. Julie, bring the baby to the phone, please. Please. Come on, my
Julie Sousa can be heard crying hysterically, but prosecutors want the jury to focus on Jerry Sousa's demeanor on the tape. To convince Jerry Sousa of murder, the state must prove that while trying to cover up that his wife killed the baby, he wasted precious time and prevented his daughter from getting immediate medical attention.
Please raise your right hand.
The state calls a series of officials who were on the scene that night who observed Jerry Sousa's behavior.
Did he display any emotion at all?
Not that I saw, no.
Did he appear to be upset?
No.
Detective Radke, have you ever dealt with people who have been in shock or emotional shock before or after a traumatic incident?
Yes.
And did Mr. Sousa appear to be in shock?
He displayed none of the characteristics that I have ever observed of anyone who was in the state of shock, no.
Well, drew your attention to the hamper.
Well, at first I noticed it was full for one thing, and I had reached down and picked up an item, and it was damp, or I thought it was damp at the time.
So then what did you do?
I took each item out and depicted all this wet clothing. Each item of clothing I picked up was damp or wet, soaked.
This shirt was among the clothes found wet in the hamper. It's Julie's. Prosecutors contend it got wet when Julie dunked her baby in scalding water. The state calls a paramedic. Prosecutors contend his testimony implies that the Sousas delayed reporting the incident.
What about the temperature of the body to the touch? Did you observe anything about her body?
The skin was cool and dry. In the areas that weren't burned, it was cool and dry. In the areas that were burned, it was moist.
Okay. Did that suggest anything to you in terms of your course of treatment of the child?
I was concerned, both my partner and I were concerned, that the child had been dead for some time.
Without eyewitnesses, that's the kind of circumstantial evidence prosecutors are banking on. Elaborating on their own cover-up theory, they call one of the most important witnesses of the trial.
Please be seated.
Police Officer Craig Sjolin spoke with 2-year-old Sierra the night of the incident.
I asked her, I said, did you give the baby a bath? You try to get a sense of how well she could articulate, and the only thing she said to me was, baby bath, and she said that 2 or 3 times. I asked her if she could show me. I said, can you show me? And do you want me to go on from there?
Yes.
She crawled to the, use the pointer again?
Yes.
She was in the crib, and she was like holding onto the rails, and she crawled up out of this corner, jumped down onto the armrest of the couch, and then jumped down onto the floor and scooted into the bathroom right here.
Okay. And what did she do when she went into the master bedroom or master bathroom area?
The first thing she did is she knelt over and picked up this yellow mustard tub. Then she went right into the sink, I use the pointer again, and dropped it right in there. And then she let go of that, she scooted around, and she kind of crawled up onto the toilet seat. She leaned over and she turned on the hot water.
Can you describe for the jury the manner in which Sierra did this for you? Showed you what?
Yeah, this thing has always made a great impression, so I remember a lot of things about it. And it was to me as though she'd done it before. It was almost like it'd been rehearsed.
Why
that was the impression I got.
I'm going to object to that. I think that's speculation, that part of it, and ask that the jury disregard that.
Jury is instructed to disregard the comment regarding as if it had been rehearsed.
Can you tell us why you thought that?
Because she seemed so task-oriented when I asked her.
That testimony could cut either way. Was Sierra rehearsed by her parents? Or was she actually showing the officer what she did to her baby sister? The defense cross-examines the officer.
And you asked her to show you how she washed the baby.
Yes, I asked her if she could, give me a demonstration. That's correct.
And she appeared to you to be very anxious to show you how she washed the baby.
Yeah, she jumped right out of the crib and scampered into the bathroom.
As far as you can tell from the time you entered the apartment, neither Jerry nor Julie had any contact with Sierra prior to your going in and talking to Sierra.
Not that I saw, no.
Okay.
Even though Officer Sjolin is a prosecution witness, he may have helped to give credence to the Sousa story, that Sierra did in fact kill her baby sister. That, of course, is an issue the jury will have to grapple with.
Stay tuned for the verdict later in this hour. We now return to this episode of Trial Story.
2.5-year-old Sierra Sousa is a central character in her parents' murder trial. The Sousas say Sierra accidentally scalded their 6-week-old baby to death. But prosecutors say the parents are blaming Sierra for a crime they themselves committed, with a story that is highly implausible. Refuting the defense theory, then, is central to the state's case.
You want to take that baby into the bathroom, Sierra?
Prosecutors are allowed to introduce an unusual piece of evidence, a videotape recreation they made of Sierra trying to give a baby doll a bath.
Baby in here. Let's get nervous.
The doll weighs approximately the same as Brooke did. Prosecutor Eakes is seen on the tape.
Okay, let's give the baby a bath. How are we going to do it? Try? Yeah, in the sink. Heavy. Yeah. How do you do it? Heavy. Do it. Can't. No? Heavy. Yeah. Baby heavy. Baby heavy. Don't hurt the baby.
Dr. Kenneth Feldman, an expert witness called by the state, viewed the videotape in court. He's questioned by Prosecutor Goder.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical probability as to whether or not Sierra Sousa possessed the strength and the agility to put Brooke Sousa in and out of a tub of drawn water, as you've previously described the injuries had to have occurred?
She would have been required to hold the infant by the left hand, just barely up out of the water, restraining a struggling infant while not getting her own hand drawn into the water or allowing the infant to move her hand around in the water. I don't think that's within the physical capability, the size, or the motor skills of a 2-year-old.
Of this 2-year-old?
Any 2-year-old.
That's condemning testimony for the defense. To further its theory, the prosecution then focuses on the nature of Brooke's burns. The state says that Julie Sousa thrust Brooke into a standing pool of scalding water. The defense claims those burns were made by running water. Dr. Feldman refutes that.
Were you able to form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical probability as to how the injuries that Brooke Sousa died from were inflicted?
Yes, I was.
And what is your opinion in that, doctor?
She was forcibly immersed in a drawn container of hot water by somebody with adult strength and size.
The prosecution takes one of many opportunities to show the jury horrifying photos of the dead baby.
Now, I think you can see the characteristics of this, that there's very sharp junction between burned and unburned skin. And if you think about the child herself, This child is immersed with the right shoulder downward, head first into the hot water, and here's our contour. The hot water right around the child's trunk. So this is a child who is immersed head first in an already drawn container of hot water.
The witness makes clear he supports the prosecution's theory of what happened to Brooke Sousa. But on cross-examination, the defense tries to poke holes in the state's case, going after the state's video recreation of Sierra bathing a doll.
Did you know also that this took place in some strange place that Sierra Sousa had never been to before?
I don't have solid information whether she was experienced with this bathroom or not.
Does that approximate in any sense the feel of a 6-week-old?
Oh, it doesn't work like a six-week-old.
Dr. Feldman then acknowledged that at least initially, the doll felt heavier than a 6-week-old. The defense scores a point. The prosecution witness has implied that the recreation was not accurate.
I don't mean like leaving. Court is again in session.
Please be seated.
After a short recess, the state rests its case. Prosecutors hope they have gone a long way towards convincing the jury the Sousas murdered their child.
And Mr. Allen, if you'd please call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. William Brady to the stand. Dr. Brady,
as the defense starts its case, it calls Dr. William Brady, a medical expert, to refute the prosecution's testimony about the nature of Brooke Sousa's burns.
Have you seen photographs, and I'm showing now Exhibit 9, showing Brooke Sousa after she was burned. You've seen those photographs before.
I have, sir.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable probability whether this burn, whether this is consistent with a burn being obtained by a child being placed into the basin, shown in Exhibit 99E, that the child's head is underneath or in the approximate location of the faucet, with water coming down at 151 degrees, and with the basin filling for whatever reason, either because the stopper was down or because the baby's bottom acted as a stopper on the sink?
I would have an opinion.
What is your opinion?
I think it would be consistent with that, yes.
Well, the child was thrust in quickly and pulled out. Would you expect this water line?
No, for the reasons we've mentioned already. The water is displaced. Having displaced the water that was there, the kitty has to stay in, if it's the thrust, long enough for the water to then flow back in to create this relatively straight linear pattern across the kitty's tummy.
The defense witness implies Brooke's injuries were not consistent with the state's theory that the baby was dunked quickly in a sink full of scalding water. The murder trial of Jerry and Julie Sousa presents a classic dilemma for the jury. Two stories, each defended to the last detail by contradictory testimony.
Stay tuned for the verdict later in this hour. We now return to this episode of Trial Story.
Amber Sousa was 12 years old the night her half-sister, Brooke, died. A 7th grade honors student, she has lived with her father and stepmother for the past 3 years.
Would you state your name for the record?
Amber Kathryn Sousa.
And Amber, do you know your...
Now, Amber is called in defense of her parents. Amber testifies she was watching TV before she went to bed the night Brooke died.
Amber, did you see Julie prior to that? In other words, you indicated Julie came in and told you about TV. Did you see Julie after that, before you went to sleep?
Yeah, she came out into the living room and got a bottle for Brooke.
Do you recall about what time that was?
9:30, 10.
That evening, Brooke and Sierra slept in her parents' bedroom. As Amber remembers it, she was the last to go to sleep.
Now, as you went to the bathroom, were you able to look into your dad's and your stepmom's room?
Yes.
Was the door open or closed when you looked in?
Open.
Did you see anything when you looked into their room?
Yeah, my sister Sierra was sitting on this mushroom chair and was looking over into my sister's bassinet.
Now, at the time that Sierra, sitting on the mushroom chair, was looking into Brooke's bassinet, what was Julie doing?
Sleeping.
Did you do or say anything?
I told Sierra to lay next to her mom on the bed, and I moved the bassinet back to where it normally was.
And why did you do what you did at that point in time?
Because I was afraid she might get up and maybe pick Brooke up again and take her somewhere or something.
Had you ever observed or seen Sierra carrying Brooke before?
Yes.
Tell the jury what you observed.
My sister Sierra was carrying Brooke around her waist and walking down the hall with her.
This was at night?
Yes.
When you say at night, do you know, like, can you give us an estimate as to what time at night?
Maybe 10 o'clock.
What were Jerry and Julie doing at that point, if you know?
Sleeping.
Amber Sousa's testimony that she had seen Sierra carrying the baby in the past clearly supports her parents' version of events. On cross-examination, Prosecutor Goder doesn't hold back as she tries to discredit the 12-year-old.
You have lived with your dad for what, the last 3 years?
Yeah.
And prior to that, you were living with your mother?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And your mother's name is Sarah. Is she here today?
No.
Okay. And you don't get along very well with your mother, do you?
Not really.
And you don't want to live with your mother, do you?
No.
And it's actually very important to you to live with your dad.
Mm-hmm.
Amber testifies she no longer lives with her father. She and Sierra were removed from the house after the murder charge.
And in fact, you live with a girlfriend and the girlfriend's mother.
Mm-hmm.
And your dad lives right there on the same property in a trailer.
Yes.
So you see your dad every single day.
Yes.
And Julie's living with your dad, right?
Yes.
So you're seeing her every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And so though you're not supposed to be living with him, in actuality, you're spending almost all of your free time with he and Julie, aren't you?
Yes.
Right. And you would do just about anything you could to protect your dad, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Is Amber Sousa lying to keep her father from going to prison? The cross-examination then shifts to Amber's recollection of the events before Brooke died. It's important to note that the time of the 911 call was 11:40 p.m.
And you said you looked at the TV and you're saying that was 10:30?
Yeah.
And that's when you looked into your parents' room and saw Sierra up?
Yes.
Would have been within a minute of turning the TV off, you were looking in your mom's room?
Yes.
Right. Now, there weren't any lights on in your mother's room, in Julie's room, were
No.
there? Right. There were no lights on in the bathroom in Julie's room.
No.
Right. But it's your testimony that you could see Sierra sitting on the mushroom chair and looking at Brooke.
Because I was in the bathroom across from our bedroom and I turned on the light to go to the bathroom and the door was open and the light I could see in there.
Right. And that's when you told Sierra to get back in bed?
Yes.
And it's your testimony that Julie was sound asleep?
Yes.
Are you aware that Julie told the police that Sierra was asleep on her bed at 10:30?
No.
Is it still your testimony that Sierra was up looking into the bassinet at 10:30?
Yes.
Are you aware that Julie told the police that she didn't go to bed until 10:30?
No.
Is it still your testimony that Julie was sound asleep at 10:30 when you looked into the bedroom?
Yes.
It's still your testimony you even looked into the bedroom,
Yes.
Amber?
Is Amber telling the truth? She stands by her story, but the prosecutor wants the jury to believe that she made it up to protect her parents.
Your Honor, the defense next calls Julie Sousa to the stand.
The trial shifts to the heart of the defense case. Jerry Sousa will testify in his own defense.
When did you meet Julie Sousa?
I met Julie in 1988.
Okay, and when did you two start living together as a couple?
I think in the winter of 1988.
Do you have children from a prior marriage?
Yes, I do. I have one daughter, Amber, and a son, Justin.
Okay. And you and Julie had Sierra, is that right?
That's correct.
And how old is Sierra now?
Sierra is, well, October 19th of this last year, she was 3 years old.
Okay. And then you two had Brooke.
That's correct.
Remember, Jerry Sousa is charged with murder in this case because he allegedly delayed medical treatment for Brooke while trying to help Julie cover up the incident. It's now his chance to convince the jury he and his wife are innocent.
Tell us what happened.
I was awakened by her calling out to me.
And what did you hear her say?
She said, "Jerry, come here." Something to the tune of basic, "Help me."
What was the tone of her voice?
Very upset. very, like an emergency situation, very excited.
What did you do?
I immediately got out of bed and went to her side.
Where was she?
She was in the master bathroom.
What was she doing?
She was holding Brooke in her arms.
What could you see at that point?
When I walked into the bathroom, I saw Sierra standing on the toilet. I saw Brooke in Julie's arms. The light was on, and I looked at everything, and right away I knew what was going on. Brooke was, she was hot. She was like wet. She'd been in hot water. That's what I could tell. She was just, I don't know how to explain it. It was horrible.
Okay, what did you do?
I reached over and grabbed Sierra, took her off the toilet. I was very angry with her. She got upset, and I walked her into the bedroom and put her in her crib and went right back to Julie.
And what did you and Julie do at that point?
Julie handed me Brooke.
How did Brooke feel?
She was so hot, I could hardly hold her. I held her my hands, and her body was just, it was just so hot I could hardly hang on to her.
Okay.
Her skin was parched on her forehead. She wasn't breathing. I couldn't tell at all that she was breathing. I listened for her breath. There wasn't any. I called 911 and began talking to them. I tried to calm down as much as I could to give them the specific information so that they wouldn't waste any time wanting something repeated or whatever.
What was Julie's emotional state during the time that you were talking to 911?
She was moaning. She was out of sorts.
Now, the 911 operator was giving you instructions with regard to CPR, is that right?
That's correct.
Did either you or Julie try CPR on the baby?
Yes, Julie tried CPR on the baby while I gave her the instructions. And that continued for, I don't know how long. All I know is I did what I could. I was worried about Brooke. And in my mind, I did everything as quickly as I possibly could.
Jerry, at any time that evening of May 11th, 1993, did you yourself harm Brooke?
No, I did not.
At any time that evening, did you see Julie harm Brooke?
No.
How long was it between the time that you woke up and the time 911 was called?
A few minutes at the most.
Jerry Sousa insists he did his best to save his daughter's life. But on cross-examination, Prosecutor Eakes tries to show Jerry Sousa is lying.
Isn't it true that you wanted to put the baby under cool water so that you could see if you could fix what Julie had done?
No, that is not true. I wanted to put Brooke under cool water because I thought it might help. She was so hot.
And isn't it true that you later denied the fact that you had put Brooke under cold water once you realized that admitting that would mean admitting that you had delayed medical care?
No, that is not true.
Mr. Sousa, isn't it fair to say that Julie was frustrated that night, the night that this happened?
No, it is not fair to say. She
Isn't it
wasn't frustrated.
Fair to say that she was feeling a little bit of postpartum depression?
No, she wasn't feeling postpartum depression.
She was kind of fed up with the demanding schedule of caring for a toddler and for an infant?
No, Julie wasn't tired of toddlers or infants.
And she wasn't complaining to you about that?
No, she wasn't.
Mr. Sousa, when you called 911 on May 11th, 1992, you already knew that the baby was dead, didn't you?
By the time I called them, I knew she was dead. I just wouldn't admit it.
And that's the fact, that's the reason why on the 911 tape you're not in a hurry, are you?
No, the reason in the 911 tape I'm supposedly not in a hurry is I was trying to get accurate information to them.
But you also knew that the baby was dead, didn't you?
Why do you think I called 911? I thought they could sustain her. I wanted them there as soon as possible.
You wanted
I
them to
wouldn't
try to
admit she
help.
was dead.
The question is, isn't it true that you told Julie to sit down and to do her job on the 911 tape?
According to this, yes.
And isn't it fair to say that you were angry with her when you told her to do that?
No, it is not fair to say. I was upset with the events of the evening.
And you were angry with her because you knew that she had killed the baby, didn't you?
No, I wasn't, because I didn't know that she'd killed the baby.
Mr. Sousa, isn't it fair to say that you were more concerned about trying to cover up for Julie than you were about getting medical care for your own daughter?
No, that's not a correct statement. I was worried about Brooke, and so was her mother. We wanted to get help for her as soon as possible. That's all we worried about.
Has the prosecution shed doubt on Jerry Sousa's story? Sousa insists his wife did nothing wrong, that together they tried to save the life of their baby.
Coming up next, the verdict. Now, the conclusion of this episode of Trial Story.
Julie feeding the boss.
On April 5th, 1992, Julie Sousa, with daughter Sierra by her side, appeared to be the proud mother of her new baby, Brooke. 5 weeks later, Brooke died, a suspicious death. And now Julie Sousa must defend herself against charges that she placed her baby in scalding water. The defense focuses on events early in the evening.
I had went to the bedroom and with Sierra and Brooke, and I was just watching a little bit of TV.
At some time, did you feed Brooke?
Yes, I fed her a bottle about 9:45, 10 o'clock. After I had given Brooke her bottle, which was about 10, she had spit up on me and herself.
Okay. And what of yourself did she spit up on? What clothing?
My shirt.
Do you know how the clothes were wet in the hamper?
I had rinsed them out, some of them out in the sink, and they just probably got others wet.
Did you have anything else to drink that evening other than the beer that you've already told us about?
No.
The beer that was on the back of the bed, where did that come from, or what beer was that?
It was probably the same one.
On May 11th, 1992, what time did you go to bed?
It was right after I fed Brooke and had gotten changed, around 10, I would say, in that neighborhood.
Okay. And where was Sierra when you went to bed?
She was at the foot of the bed and she was sleeping.
And did she have anything over her?
Yeah, she had her own blanket, her silky blanket.
And where was Brooke?
In the bassinet next to our bed.
What's the next thing you remember that evening?
I remember waking up and I heard water running, and I found Sierra in the bathroom with Brooke, and she had Brooke in this.
Was the water running?
Yes.
Okay. Did Sierra say anything?
She said baby bath, baby ucky.
What did you do or say next? Did you do something?
I just screamed for Jerry.
Did you take Brooke out of the sink?
Yeah, I did.
Did you observe obvious injuries to Brooke?
Yeah. She just looked horrible.
And what did Jerry do?
I asked him to do something to help, and he took Brooke for a second, and then he handed her back to me. I told him to call 911.
And what were you doing?
Just holding Brooke.
Were you upset?
Yes.
Could this woman have killed her own daughter? She's denied doing anything wrong. Prosecutor Goder then tries to discredit Julie Sousa.
Where was her head?
Was in the sink.
Where in the sink?
I'm not sure. I just picked her up right away. I just know she was in the sink.
Well, you previously told the jury that there was water running on her face, didn't you?
Yes, there was.
Well, then where was her head in relationship to the faucet?
It was like right in this area.
Was it to the side of the faucet or directly under the faucet?
I don't remember.
Do you often take a beer to bed with you, Mrs. Sousa?
No.
But you did that night?
I was probably just finishing.
Were you just finishing, or were you probably just finishing?
I was just drinking the last of it.
The cross-examination shifts to the period after the 911 phone call.
You were doing nothing to try to save the baby's life at that point, were you?
That's not true.
You weren't doing CPR, were you?
We did do CPR.
At the point when the police are arriving on the scene, you were not doing CPR, were you?
No, we weren't.
And isn't it fair to say that you weren't doing CPR because you knew the baby was already dead?
I didn't know that.
You knew the baby had been dead for quite some time, didn't you, Mrs. Sousa?
I didn't know that.
When you gave the baby its bottle for the end of the day, at the end of the day there that evening, 10 o'clock time frame, whenever it was, you were pretty tired by then, weren't you?
I was tired, but it was just a day. I was used to it.
You were ready to go to sleep, weren't you?
Yeah, after I'd taken care of Brooke and got her fed and ready for bed that night.
And this was sort of an unexpected event, sort of upsetting that finally everybody's ready for bed and this baby, once again, spits up.
No, it's normal for babies to spit up.
And when she spit up, she got it all over herself in addition to you. She got it in her hair, she had it on her face, on her shoulders. Isn't that correct?
She had it on her clothes and she had it on me, yeah, but it's not a big deal.
And Mrs. Sousa, isn't it fair to say that this is what sparked your complete loss of control and caused you to draw this sink of hot water and dip your baby head first into the sink?
Nothing sparked anything because that is not what happened.
And isn't it fair to say that when you finally realized that the baby had died, that then you and your husband decided to blame Sierra, the only person in the house that couldn't defend herself?
No.
I have nothing else, Your Honor.
Julie Sousa has stood her ground, denying she killed her daughter. Is she believable? Has her testimony and her husband's created a reasonable doubt in the prosecution's case? The jury will soon decide. But first, the lawyers give their closing arguments.
Sometime before 10:30 in the evening on May the 11th, Julie Sousa did the unspeakable, the unthinkable, the incomprehensible. She took her baby, having drawn a basin of hot water, and holding her by the feet, plunged her in to scalding water. And then they concocted a story. They blamed Sierra, a 2-year-old, a child too young to talk, a child too young to defend herself, a child who will now live with the stigma that her parents killed her sister and tried to blame it on her. At this time, the state asks you to dismantle that web of deceit and hold them responsible for what they did, taking the life of 6-week-old Brooke, and find them guilty as charged of murder in the 2nd degree. Thank you.
It's unbelievable. To borrow a word from the prosecutor, it's incomprehensible almost how much hatred or anger a mother would have to premeditate this and fill up a sink as high as possible with 151-degree water and shove that beautiful little baby in the sink head first till the baby is burned. It's unbelievable. But stick to proof beyond a reasonable doubt, because there are many, many reasonable doubts here. Many. First tragedy was that lovely child, Brooke, died. Second tragedy is that Brooke died at the hands of Sierra. Julie saying, "Sierra, Sierra, I need to see Sierra." The third tragedy was that they were charged and had to go through this. And the final ultimate tragedy would be if they're convicted of this crime which they didn't commit. You, the jury, have the power to keep this from happening, and I ask you to return verdicts of not guilty to everything.
It's now up to the jury to decide, are Julie and Jerry Sousa guilty of killing their child, or have they been wrongfully accused? If they're found guilty, they face life in prison. If acquitted, they will carry with them the scars of having been wrongfully accused and of having suffered the loss of their baby. The deliberations dragged on for days.
Please be seated.
On the fourth day, the jury says it's deadlocked. It can't reach a decision. But the judge tells the jury to keep trying and orders them to resume deliberations.
All rise. Court is now in session.
After another day and a total of 22 hours of deliberations, the trial finally comes to an end. But it doesn't lead to a conclusion.
Having heard no objection, I'm going to discharge the jury and declare what's called a mistrial.
Judge Laura Inveen declares a mistrial. The jury could not reach the required unanimous decision on either Jerry or Julie Sousa.
I believed her testimony, and I guess I believe that she did care about her baby, and she didn't come across to me as a type of person who would injure her child.
The jury voted 5 not guilty, 7 guilty for Julie Sousa. For Jerry Sousa, the vote was split, right down the middle, 6 guilty, 6 not guilty. Despite the hung jury, prosecutor Eakes believes the Sousas are guilty.
Obviously, we have prosecuted this case the first time because we believe in it. We continue to believe in it. We continue to believe it's just illustrative of how difficult it is to protect children and to prosecute these kinds of cases when you don't have any witnesses except for the alleged abusers themselves.
In the end, the state had to prove the Sousas' guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's a difficult task when the prosecutors must rely on circumstantial evidence and when the defendants themselves take the stand. But this case may not be over. Because there was a hung jury, prosecutors have the option of trying the Sousas a second time.
I think if they continue with the case, I think it would just be vindictive based upon what this jury's saying, because I don't believe that they can find a jury that will convict the Sousas on these charges.
For Core TV, I'm Cynthia McFadden.